Hi, I'm Pamela Davis, welcoming you again to the Reincarnation Chronicle. And I am an investigative transformationalist, as you know, exploring life's great questions. And certainly the great question that we're exploring together now is reincarnation. And reincarnation, to understand it as well as possible, we need to do a little looking into consciousness and the evolution of consciousness. Where and what is consciousness? How did it get here? Who partakes of it? Who has it? Is there anything that doesn't? So there was, let's talk about a really fascinating individual whose work is only now just beginning to be familiar to Western scholars. And this was an amazing European scholar, metaphysician, and Orientalist by the name of Schwaller de Lubitsch, who did a lot of work in Egypt in the early 1900s, mostly in the 1920s, I believe, with his wife and his stepdaughter, who was, his wife was an Egyptologist and his daughter was a very gifted artist. And together they spent around 10 years at the Temple of Karnak on the Nile in, south of Cairo. And over these 10 years, Schwaller de Lubitsch was completely absorbed, obsessed with this amazing building that was added to by successive pharaohs. Its creation spans hundreds and hundreds of years. And he carefully, meticulously measured it because he realized that the measurements within it were actually a code for the Egyptians' understanding of the universe. It was sacred geometry in its highest form. And Schwaller, as he studied it further and deeper, began to realize that it was perhaps the ultimate expression of the ancient Egyptians' understanding of man and the development of consciousness according to the ancient belief system. And when he got all done, he wrote this fabulous book, very scholarly, very huge tome, entitled Le Temple de l'Homme, or The Temple of Man. It was first written in French and has only just in recent years become available in English. Now, if you want to find out more about this absolutely intriguing study, and you want to be able to understand it in an abbreviated form in a way that's really quite easy to grasp and to get into, then I would recommend that you read the book The Serpent in the Sky by my dear friend and undoubtedly the world's most controversial Egyptologist, John Anthony West. It's a wonderful book, and John Anthony West is probably the greatest living authority on Schwaller de Lubitsch. So it's a wonderful book to understand the ancient Egyptian philosophy and cosmology and all that. So Schwaller was known to have said, anything and everything that has mass has consciousness. Well, it sounds like a very simple statement, and has to be true, because if you concede that our planet was evolved through divine mind over eons, as it is with planets and their creation, then out of divine mind it emerged, and therefore every single part of it has to be imbued with the consciousness of the divine somewhere. And that is from the lowliest pebble on the beaches to the plants and animals, and then eventually, of course, man. Now, if you want to understand how consciousness evolves through these different kingdoms, the mineral kingdom, plant kingdom, animal kingdom, and then into the human being, There are some wonderful books, so loads of them, but there are two authors that I would really recommend. One of them is Peter Tompkins, who decades ago wrote a wonderful book called The Secret Life of Plants. And it was a landmark book when it was written. Peter Tompkins was a journalist and even a spy during World War II, and this marvelous investigative researcher and author who began to specialize in later years in a lot of wonderful esoteric topics, including not only plants but the Mexican pyramids and all kinds of things. But he went into a lot of detail in The Secret Life of Plants on studies that have been that had been done in his time, in those days, on the effect of vibrations and energies on plants, and how plants quite clearly demonstrated in laboratory settings the clear presence of consciousness. So this is a really marvelous book to look into for that kind of thing. Then you've got consciousness in animals, and there is a fantastic scholar who I'm also very privileged to know casually, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, who is a cell biologist and a biophysicist who taught and lectured at Cambridge a number of years, and who is now known around the world for his groundbreaking work on a theory that he evolved called morphic resonance. And again, all you have to do is Google morphic resonance and Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, and you'll come up with some of the most fascinating information. But he has worked extensively and done a lot of experiments involving consciousness and ESP in animals. For example, there's a wonderful book that he wrote about dogs that know when their owners are coming home, and other things as well that clearly demonstrate the unmistakable presence of very active consciousness in animals. So these have been very valuable contributions to understanding that they're actually, I mean, you know, when you see these headlines, like on the cover of Time or Newsweek, asking the question, do animals think? This just drives me wild. You have to ask if the writers of the article or the scientists that they interviewed think more than whether animals think, you know. So what happens is, going back to the grains of sand and the pebbles on the beach and so forth, you have consciousness that begins primarily in the mineral kingdom. And as one of the great teachers said a long time ago, told me with a little chuckle, well, even a stone has its own sense of humor. So this wouldn't be something we'd normally think about, but apparently it's true. But the mineral kingdom has a consciousness, to be sure. But as consciousness moves through it, and consciousness is not static, it's always moving and always ascending in spiral motion. And eventually it passes through the mineral kingdom, the rocks and the sand and the rocks and earth structures and forms, into the plant kingdom. And in the plant kingdom, again, it begins to be more refined, more specialized. And there are lots of nature psychics and sensitives who report being able to commune with trees. This isn't even that unusual any longer. And as the consciousness within the plant kingdom becomes more refined and more specialized, and eventually evolves into the enormous redwood trees and so forth, you have nature spirits that then emerge out of the consciousness in plants and in nature and in growing things. And in this kingdom, you have all kinds of wonderful wonderful creatures that again are discernible to people with developed second sight or developed ESP. Elves, fairies, sylphs, naiads, and all the different water spirits, and devas, which are the highly developed spirits that control certain domains within nature, like the forest of redwood trees would have its overarching, magnificent devic consciousness, or the deva of that forest. My brother, actually, who is a genius in the development of plant medicine, and particularly of working with deriving medicines from living flowers, has seen and works with the deva of flowers, and specifically the deva of flower essences, which has emerged out of man's use of flowers as therapy. So you have all of these marvelous and more specialized forms out of the plant kingdom that then move upward in a spiral motion into the animal kingdom. And of course, you know, in the lower animal forms, we don't see very much in the way of individuation or specialized consciousness. You get more of a flock or a herd mentality with a lot of animals. And yet, you know, you have rather unusual cases, which now with today's media communications have become more easily known and have been observed by more people than they would have been in the past. You have horses and dogs that perform amazing feats that you can hardly believe. Documentaries have been done about this. Cats, and even some birds like parrots and macaws that are absolutely remarkable, and who clearly exhibit the ability to choose. You know, there are different responses that if they were programmed, it would be difficult for them to choose the proper response in differing conditions or situations. And yet these animals clearly demonstrate the ability to discern and to make choice. And the ability to make choice, to rise above basic animal instincts, is probably the most salient characteristic of the nascent human being. So we're going to talk about what happens when animal consciousness makes that evolved animal consciousness makes that leap into the realm of the human being, and we'll be covering that next in part 2. So don't go away.